Hi there, and welcome to part 4 of the Introduction to Evaluation training hosted by the Ruth Mott Foundation in August of 2016. I am Liz Delaney. I'm the Learning Officer here at the Foundation. So part 4 of the training really focuses on evaluation consent and data sharing. And so I really love this comic, although right now, as I'm recording this, it is not the season to be speaking about Santa, but I think it's cute. It says, Santa, in order to do this data collection the right way, we're going to need a more specific definition of bad and good. We're also going to need to assign unique child identifiers. This first name stuff won't fly. So it really gets at the idea that we really need to be careful with the data that we're collecting, apparently, even if we're an elf. So some questions I threw out to the crowd were, what is evaluation consent and why is evaluation consent important? And since we can't have, an interaction in this training, in this recording, I'll just kind of tell you what my thoughts were about it. So when I'm talking about evaluation consent, I'm talking about actually asking the participants that are giving you data if you can use the data that you are collecting in order to do evaluation. And so this is actually an important and somewhat challenging area for nonprofits. There's not actually a lot of case law around this information yet, unless you are working in education and have FERPA requirements by the federal government, or unless you are working in health and have HIPAA requirements. Outside of that, we're really working within the ethical realm, right? And trying to make sure that participants know what we're doing with their data, as well as making sure that, we are not taking advantage of anybody. So in the information that's included on our website, you will see a couple examples of evaluation consent. Some of them, are for adults, and other ones are for children or youth. I included a paragraph about, what you would put at the beginning of a survey for adults, both on a paper survey and an online survey, and then what you need to do with youth. And, with youth, if you're getting any information from anyone under the age of 18, you really need to have consent for that. I've also included 2 links to 2 other documents about evaluation and, how to make sure you are gathering information in an ethical manner. So please take a look at that. So as far as the foundation is concerned, at this point, the foundation always wants information presented to us, our program staff and reports at an aggregate level. We never want individual or raw data sent to us at this point. So, down the line, in a secure location, we may ask for something like that. But at this point, we do not want any individual or raw data, which means that if you have a spreadsheet that has every person that's in your program listed by name and social security number and all these numbers, right? And then you actually have data on them included in that sheet, we don't want that. What we want to know is how all the people in your program are faring. How are they doing on the different things that you're measuring? The second thing is that no matter what type of data you're collecting, you should have some sort of consent process in place. And there were a lot of really good discussions about this in the in-person training. And, some people said, well, what if we haven't had a consent process in place in the past? Can we still use that data? Well, so this is really a best practice model. Right now, what I normally say is that we're trying not to become part of case law, right? And we want to make sure the participants know what we're doing with the information we're collecting. And so if you haven't been collecting it in the past, I do not know of any law that would say you need to go back and do it. If you're able, if you're still, if you're still in contact with those that you've collected information from before, it would be a good idea to let them know, hey, this is what we're doing with your data, and then give them a chance to opt out. If that's not a possibility, what's done is done, and what you need to do going forward is really make sure that you have processes in place to take care of those individuals that you're collecting data from. So some best practices for evaluation consent: make sure that you are sharing what you're doing, and make sure you're always updating the information that you are collecting. The second thing is make sure you develop a policy and stick with it in your organization. And make sure that you are enforcing what that policy is and always checking in. If you don't need data, don't track it. So don't collect social security numbers just to collect social security numbers. Make sure you're only collecting the things that you're using. Make sure that someone in your organization is responsible for keeping up to date on these best practices and for the safety and security of the data, as well as making sure you have the proper consents to share. And then build and protect sharing agreements with other groups. So in just a couple minutes, I'm going to go into data sharing agreements. So if you are using someone else's data as a secondary data source, or if you are sharing your data for someone else to use as a secondary source, you should have an agreement between your two organizations that says what data you're going to use and how you're going to use it. So we'll talk about that more in a little bit, and probably quite a bit more in the workshops in September. So I already provided you some examples of consent forms, but I think what I wanted to show here is that there is a difference between typical consent for treatment forms or consent for participation forms and evaluation consent forms. And so, you do need to include a couple extra pieces of information under confidentiality and contact information. It is possible, if you already have participants signing a bunch of consent forms, that you can include your evaluation consent language in those forms. However, you really want to make sure that people can say they want to participate in your program, but they can say that they don't want to participate in your evaluation. And so, don't use all the language that says this is what you're consenting to in order to participate in programs, and this is what you're consenting to in order to participate in evaluation, and then just have one checkbox. Do you agree to this? Yes or no? Because if they don't agree to the evaluation consent, you still want to be able to provide services to them and have them participate in the awesome things that you're doing. And so definitely always have sort of an extra field. At this point, I really wanted people to think about what their current practices are for data privacy and kind of talk about that. All right, so the final section is really around data security and sharing. And so a couple of things about data security that I've seen organizations do, because I've seen some things in the years I've been doing this. And the first thing that I would like to talk about is Google Docs and Google Sheets. It's a wonderful thing to be able to go on to Google Docs and Google Sheets because it's web-based and you can have multiple people get on those documents and sheets together, and they can enter information at the same time. And it keeps you from having to save multiple drafts of the same document. However, it is not secure from hacking, and you don't host the site where the data is entered. So you really should not use Google Docs and specifically Google Sheets, which is sort of the Excel-based version of Google Sheets. If you are collecting identifiable data, so names, addresses, ages, birth dates, social security numbers. Also, any sensitive data should not be included on that information. Health data and education data, because those are governed by HIPAA and FERPA. And if you just think, if you were a participant in a program, would it be okay with you if your information was out there on the web somewhere that wasn't very secure? The answer is probably no. It would be for me. So instead of doing that, you can keep your data on your own server where you have more control over who's accessing it. And if you needed to share the information, there are two main ways to do it that are pretty secure. The first really does require someone with some programming skills to do it. So if you have this in-house, that'd be great, but if not, this probably isn't a great option. But it's called a Secure File Transfer Protocol. If you've ever used Dropbox, it's similar to Dropbox, where they, sort of make a drive, but it's secure, and only the people who have the proper passwords have access to it. And it does allow you to do it over the internet, but it's secure. The other way, the old-fashioned way is, and it's not that old-fashioned because I used to use a disk, right? But the older-fashioned way is to do a flash drive, and that works just fine. I would just, throw a password on the file that you're trying to share and make sure that the other person has the password. And again, this is really for sensitive, identifiable data and that around health and education. Email can also be a difficult thing. If you're sending an email in-house, it's a little better, although education and health, I'd still be pretty careful with that. But anything that, again, is identifiable, sensitive health or education data, you need to be pretty careful. Obviously, email can be hacked. I'm sure we've all had our email hacked at some point. And the other thing is, if you email to public entities, the email can be FOIA'd. And so, be very careful about sending any data over the web via email. So again, if you need to share data, again, SFTP or flash drive. Flash drive is probably what most people would use. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is web-based survey data collection. So, web-based survey data collection would be like SurveyMonkey is a very popular web-based survey. Be very careful if you're collecting sensitive data or data about illegal activity. Although you can set it to be anonymous, it does still track IP addresses, and it may put participants at risk. So specifically, if you were asking people about whether they were legal here in the U.S., that might put people at risk, and you may not know that. The other thing is you really want to make sure that you're aware of the privacy policies of the web-based survey instrument, how they're keeping your data, if you have access to the raw data, and if they're actually going to share that data publicly. And just make sure that you're okay with that and that your participants are aware of what's being done with their data. And then finally, I wanted to discuss data security and sharing. So as I said before, data sharing agreements are really used to share secondary data between two organizations, two or more. It is a legal document between those organizations, and what I can say about that is if you need assistance, I can give you some resources for that, but it is a legal document, so it's a good idea to, if you are asked to enter into a data sharing agreement, that you make sure that you can abide by the terms of that agreement and that you are comfortable with what's being asked of you. And I think it's a good idea to have your legal counsel look it over as well. All right, so next steps in homework. So there is a homework sheet in the list of materials. You don't have to use that homework sheet, but the information that I'm asking for on it will help you when you come to the workshops in September. So make sure that you develop and or refine your evaluation questions. Brainstorm possible outcome and output measures and sources in order to answer your evaluation questions. And then think through what story you'd like to tell using your data. And then you're going to bring that information back to help us with the workshops, which will be mostly led by you and other organizations. It will not be the Liz show like this one is. And then again, those September workshops are to clarify your outcome measures and connect with other grantees and community partners working on similar data. So again, I'm going to have different community partners at each one of these meetings that have access to data. They can talk about what data they have, what data they normally use, and then there's going to be a lot of discussion with your peer groups around data and data collection. So the dates are listed here in the PowerPoint, dates and times and locations as well. You actually already should have emails in your mailboxes that have the invitation information, so please make sure that you register. There are a limited number of seats, and it is limited to current Ruth Mott Foundation grantees, unless and anyone else that the foundation needs to invite to these. So I look forward to seeing you at the workshops. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I hope to see you soon. All right, bye-bye.